The morning light over Pearl Harbor was thin and gray on September 30, 1944, the kind that flattened color and sharpened edges. USS Tang lay low in the water, her black hull streaked with salt and oil, her deck already warm under the Hawaiian sun. She was a WWII-class submarine, steel-skinned and narrow, built to hunt where mistakes meant drowning. Lines were cast off without ceremony. No band played. No speeches followed. Men climbed down the hatch in silence, knowing this patrol would take them deep into waters where American submarines were expected to kill or vanish. Commander Richard H. O'Kane stood on the bridge in a faded khaki uniform, binoculars resting against his chest. He was 34, lean, sharp-eyed, already a veteran of the Pacific. He had learned his trade aboard USS Wahoo, watching attacks at periscope depth, studying angles, speeds, and the brutal economy of torpedoes. Now Tang was his command, and the sea lanes ahead were crowded with enemy shipping feeding island garrisons that refused to die quietly. This was not a reconnaissance run. This was a strike. Below decks, the submarine was alive with controlled motion. Diesel engines rumbled like distant thunder. Sailors in dungarees checked valves, tested circuits, and stowed ammunition with practiced hands. The air smelled of fuel oil, sweat, and metal. Torpedoes, Mark 18 electrics and Mark 14 steamers, lay cradled in the forward room, their brass fittings cold to the touch. Each one carried the promise of destruction and the risk of failure. In 1944, American submariners trusted their weapons because they had no other choice. As Tang cleared the harbor and turned west, the Pacific opened into a vast, indifferent plain. The patrol area lay thousands of miles away, enemy-controlled waters near Formosa and the East China Sea, where depth charges waited and escorts hunted aggressively. Charts were spread. Routes marked. O'Kane's plan was simple and merciless: penetrate shipping lanes, attack at night on the surface when possible, close the range, fire accurately, and stay long enough to be sure the target was finished. By midday, Pearl Harbor was gone, replaced by rolling swells and open horizon. The radio crackled once, then fell silent. From this point forward, Tang would operate alone. No air cover. No immediate rescue. Just 87 men sealed inside a pressure hull, descending toward darkness with orders that allowed no hesitation. When the diving alarm finally sounded and the boat slipped beneath the surface, the Pacific swallowed her whole, another American submarine entering the killing grounds, carrying a record yet to be written, and a fate no one aboard could see coming. Richard Hetherington O'Kane did not believe in cautious victories. He believed in closing the distance. Long before USS Tang ever slipped into the Pacific, O'Kane had learned that submarines survived by attacking first, harder, and closer than anyone expected. In 1943, aboard USS Wahoo under Commander Dudley Mush-Morton, he had stood at the periscope during some of the most aggressive submarine attacks of the war. Those lessons were written in his memory with fire and steel. By the time O'Kane took command of Tang in late 1943, he had already rejected the idea of long-range, conservative torpedo shots. American torpedoes had failed too often early in the war. Magnetic exploders malfunctioned. Depth settings ran wrong. O'Kane's answer was simple and dangerous: bring the submarine in close, inside escort screens, where even a faulty torpedo could not miss. Range would be measured in hundreds of yards, not thousands. Survival would depend on speed, discipline, and nerve. Inside Tang, this philosophy shaped everything. Attack drills were relentless. Fire control parties practiced until their hands moved without thought. Plotters tracked targets by stopwatch and grease pencil. Torpedo crews memorized loading sequences in the dark. O'Kane demanded silence, precision, and absolute trust. He did not raise his voice often. When he spoke, it was clipped and exact. Every man aboard understood that hesitation would get them killed faster than enemy depth charges. O'Kane's doctrine also broke convention. He favored surface attacks at night, using darkness and speed to overwhelm convoys. With radar contacts feeding the plot and lookouts scanning from the bridge, Tang could run down targets like a destroyer, firing torpedoes at point-blank range before slipping away. It was a tactic that required confidence bordering on defiance. Enemy escorts carried guns, radar, and depth charges. One mistake on the surface meant instant annihilation. Yet the crew believed in it because it worked. O'Kane's patrols prior to 1944 had already shown results: ships sunk cleanly, escorts confused, American submarines escaping with minimal damage. He trusted his officers, and he trusted his boat. The Belau-class hull could dive deep, absorb punishment, and keep fighting. That strength encouraged boldness, and boldness fed success. As Tang moved westward beneath the Pacific, O'Kane reviewed charts of shipping lanes near Formosa and the Luzon Strait. These waters were heavily traveled and heavily defended. Japanese convoys moved oil, troops, and ammunition under constant escort. It was exactly the kind of environment O'Kane wanted. Danger concentrated targets. Targets created opportunity. Standing in the control room, red lights casting long shadows across steel bulkheads, O'Kane gave his standing orders. Close the range. Fire accurately. Stay aggressive. Leave no doubt. The men listened without speaking, knowing that this patrol would test everything they had learned and that the doctrine of aggression would soon be measured in explosions heard through water. The first contact came at night, just after sunset, when the Pacific turned black and flat and unforgiving. It was early October 1944, north of Luzon, in waters thick with traffic and danger. USS Tang ran on the surface, diesels humming low, radar masts slicing the darkness. On the scope, blips appeared, steady, deliberate, unmistakable. A convoy. Multiple ships. Slow. Heavy. Laden with fuel, ammunition, and men who would never reach the front. O'Kane took the bridge, binoculars useless in the dark but habit demanded them. Lookouts whispered bearings. The radar operator called ranges in clipped tones. The convoy moved without urgency, trusting escorts and darkness to keep them safe. That confidence was exactly what Tang fed on. O'Kane ordered flank speed. The submarine surged forward, while lifting slightly as seawater hissed along the hull. Below decks, the forward torpedo room came alive. Men stripped to undershirts in the humid air, hands slick with sweat as they checked firing pistons in gyro angles. Mark 18 electric torpedoes were ready to quiet, wakeless, deadly at close range. The boat slid ahead of the convoy, positioning for a classic end-around attack. No wasted movement. No noise. Every order passed in whispers and hand signals. When Tang turned in, she closed to distances that would have horrified more cautious commanders. Less than 1,000 yards. Sometimes closer. Targets loomed as black masses against darker water. O'Kane chose freighters first, ships carrying oil drums and crates stacked high on deck. One firing solution after another. Bearings steady. Speed constant. Gyros set. The command came sharp and calm. Torpedoes left the tubes with muted thuds. Seconds stretched. Then the night shattered. Explosions rolled across the water, deep and heavy, lifting columns of flame and smoke. A freighter broke apart amidships, fire racing along its deck. Another ship shuddered, slowed, then began to list. Screams carried faintly across the waves, swallowed by engine noise and fire. Enemy escorts reacted late. Searchlights stabbed the darkness. Gunfire cracked toward empty water. Depth charges splashed wide, detonations muffled and distant. Tang was already moving, engines driving her between targets, slipping through confusion like a blade. O'Kane ordered additional shots, finishing damaged ships with cold efficiency. The supply lifeline was snapping, one hull at a time. Inside the submarine, the crew listened to explosions through steel and water, counting hits by sound and vibration. There was no cheering. No celebration. Only the steady work of loading, firing, maneuvering. The air grew hotter. The smell of oil and cordite crept in through vents. Men wiped faces and waited for the next order. As Tang withdrew into the darkness, burning wrecks marked the convoy's grave. The first blows of the patrol had landed cleanly. Enemy shipping lay crippled behind them, escorts blind and frantic. But the sea ahead was still crowded, and the enemy would not remain careless for long. Somewhere beyond the flames, more targets waited, and so did the counterattack. By mid-October 1944, USS Tang was operating where submarines were never meant to linger. The waters off Formosa were shallow, uneven, and crowded with patrol craft. There was little depth to hide in and no room for error. Here, a misjudged dive angle or a late order could drive a submarine into the seabed or leave her exposed beneath enemy keels. Tang moved submerged during daylight, creeping forward at slow speed. Electric motors whispered. Men spoke only when necessary. Every sound carried through water. Sonar pings from enemy escorts swept overhead, sharp and metallic, probing for steel. Each pulse tightened muscles and slowed breathing. O'Kane ordered depth kept just above the bottom, writing the thin margin between concealment and catastrophe. Mud and silt rose as the boat settled lower. Fine particles drifted past the periscope lens, blurring the world outside. The depth gauge needle barely moved. In places, there were only a few dozen feet beneath the keel. The submarine became part of the seafloor, silent and still, her crew listening to the enemy hunt. Depth charges followed. Not the wild barrages of open ocean, but deliberate drops, spaced and calculated. Explosions thudded through the hull, close enough to rattle fittings and shake loose rust. Lights flickered. Men grabbed pipes and braced themselves. Water seeped through worn seals, dripping steadily into bilges. The smell of oil mixed with damp steel and fear. O'Kane refused to be rushed. He knew escorts expected submarines to panic, to run, to give themselves away. Instead, Tang waited. Engines stopped. Pumps silenced. The crew counted seconds between explosions, measuring distance by sound and vibration. When charges walked closer, O'Kane shifted depth by feet, not yards, letting pressure and terrain mask movement. Hours passed this way. Sweat-soaked uniforms. Faces shone under dim red lights. The air grew thick, heavy with carbon dioxide and tension. Yet discipline held. No one broke silence. Every man understood that stillness was survival. As night approached, the pressure eased. Sonar pings faded. Escorts moved on, convinced the submarine was destroyed or gone. Only then did O'Kane order slow ascent. The boat rose carefully, ballast adjusted by hand, until the periscope broke the surface. Darkness had returned, and with it, opportunity. On the bridge, cool air rushed in as hatches opened. Lookouts scanned a horizon littered with distant lights, ships moving confidently through waters they believed secure. The danger had not passed. Shallow seas still hemmed Tang in, and enemy patrols remained close. But the crew had endured the hunt, and the boat was still whole. O'Kane studied the chart, finger tracing shipping lanes that cut across the darkness. Supplies were still moving. Targets still careless. The enemy believed these waters belonged to them. Tang was about to prove how wrong that belief was by striking again where escape would be hardest of all. Night belonged to USS Tang. By late October 1944, darkness was no longer concealment alone, it was a weapon. Under a moonless sky in the East China Sea, Tang ran surfaced at high speed, diesels roaring low and steady, black hull cutting cleanly through calm water. Enemy shipping lights flickered ahead, careless pinpricks scattered across the horizon. Convoys moved as if the war could not reach them here. O'Kane intended to correct that belief. Radar fed the plot continuously. Bearings tightened. Speeds confirmed. Targets resolved into silhouettes, tankers heavy with fuel, freighters stacked high with cargo, escorts pacing wide arcs of protection. On the bridge, lookouts crouched low, eyes straining, fingers white around railings. The wind carried the smell of oil smoke and distant fires from earlier kills. Every mile closed increased the risk of discovery, but O'Kane drove Tang forward without hesitation. This was surface warfare stripped to its essence. No periscope. No hiding below. Just speed, darkness, and timing. O'Kane ordered the boat across the convoy's bow, engines pushing hard as the submarine threaded gaps between ships. The enemy saw nothing. No searchlights. No flares. The night swallowed Tang whole. Below, the torpedo room worked like a machine. Men moved in practice silence, loading Mark 18s, setting gyros for short-range shots. Sweat dripped from chins onto steel decking. Every calculation mattered. At these distances, seconds decided life or death. Fire control called solutions that bordered on impossibly close. O'Kane accepted them without adjustment. Stand by, fire. The torpedoes ran true. One struck beneath a tanker's bridge, detonating fuel in a rolling wall of flame. Another slammed into a freighter's engine room, tearing steel apart. The convoy erupted into chaos. Ships slowed. Alarms blared. Tracers stitched the dark, gunfire spraying wildly into empty water. Searchlights snapped on too late, cutting through smoke and confusion. Tang did not retreat. She pressed the attack, swinging toward new targets, firing again with methodical calm. Each explosion marked another break in the supply chain, feeding island garrisons already starving. O'Kane maneuvered inside the convoy, daring escorts to react fast enough. They could not. Darkness and surprise held the advantage. Depth charges splashed behind the submarine as she accelerated away, but none found their mark. Within minutes, Tang vanished into black water, leaving burning wrecks and drifting debris behind her. On board, no one spoke. There was no triumph in their faces, only focus. Reload. Check damage. Prepare for the next contact. These attacks stacked quickly. Night after night, Tang struck with the same ruthless precision. Enemy shipping losses mounted. Escort commanders grew nervous. Patrol patterns tightened. The sea grew more dangerous with every success. O'Kane knew it could not last forever. The enemy would adapt. The next encounter would be harder, closer, and deadlier. As Tang slipped back into darkness after another flawless surface run, fire smoldered on the horizon behind her. Ahead lay more convoys, more escorts, and the narrowing margin between hunter and hunted, where one mistake would finally give the night its turn to strike back. The retaliation came swiftly. By late October 1944, the sea no longer tolerated mistakes, and the enemy had learned USS Tang's rhythm. After another successful night attack, radar contacts multiplied behind her. Escorts closed fast, their screws churning the water with purpose. O'Kane ordered the dive without hesitation. Hatches slammed. Air valves hissed. The Pacific swallowed Tang again. The first depth charges detonated within minutes. Not distant warnings, but close, concussive blows that punched through steel and bone alike. The hull groaned as pressure slammed inward. Lights flickered. Men were thrown against bulkheads. Tools rattled loose and clattered across decks. The sound was not an explosion so much as a giant fist hammering the submarine from every direction at once. O'Kane took Tang down hard. 100 feet. 150. 200. He ordered sharp course changes, then silence. Engines stopped. Pumps cut. The submarine drifted, a steel coffin suspended in black water. Inside, men clutched pipes and braces, jaws locked, counting seconds between detonations. Each charge felt closer than the last. The escorts knew what they were doing. Sonar pings swept across the hull, metallic and relentless, followed by carefully spaced drops. This was not panic bombing. It was a calculated kill. Depth charges erupted above and below, compressing the water until it felt solid. Seams wept. Gauges trembled. A breaker tripped, plunging compartments into darkness until emergency lights snapped on. The smell of battery acid drifted through the air, sharp and choking. A minor leak, but in a submarine, nothing was minor. Men moved quickly, sealing compartments, spreading neutralizing powder, fighting fear with muscle memory. O'Kane remained still, listening. He tracked the escorts by sound alone, mapping their patterns in his head. When the rhythm shifted, he made his move. A slow turn. A controlled descent. Tang slid toward the seabed, settling into silt with a muted shudder. Mud rose in clouds, masking the hull from sonar. The boat became part of the ocean floor, engines dead, crew frozen in place. Depth charges continued to fall, but now they detonated just far enough away to spare the pressure hull. Close enough to remind everyone how thin the margin was. Hours dragged by. Air grew foul. Sweat soaked through uniforms. Knees cramped. No one spoke. Above them, escorts circled, frustrated, unsure. Eventually, their attacks thinned. Pings faded. Propeller noises receded into the distance. The enemy believed the submarine destroyed or crippled. Only then did O'Kane give the order to rise. Slowly. Carefully. The ballast shifted. The hull creaked as Tang lifted free of the bottom. Men exhaled for the first time in hours. The submarine had survived again, battered but intact. Yet as systems were checked and reports filtered in, it was clear the patrol was reaching its breaking point. Equipment was strained. The enemy was adapting. Each engagement now carried greater risk than the last. And somewhere ahead, in darker water and tighter seas, the fight waiting for Tang would not allow another escape. By the final days of October 1944, the numbers no longer felt real. USS Tang had been at sea for weeks, striking again and again across the Luzon Strait and the East China Sea, and each successful attack added weight to a record no American submarine had ever carried before. Ships burned behind her wake. Supply routes fractured. Enemy traffic thinned or diverted entirely. The sea itself seemed to remember where Tang had passed. O'Kane tracked every result with care. Sinkings were logged by time, position, and tonnage, confirmed by explosions, fires, and secondary detonations. There was no exaggeration, no guesswork. When a ship went down, it went down cleanly. By the end of the patrol, Tang would be credited with destroying 33 enemy vessels totaling more than 116,000 tons, more than any submarine in a single war patrol in U.S. Navy history. The crew felt the strain of that success. Sleep came in fragments. Uniforms stayed damp with sweat and seawater. Hands were blistered from loading torpedoes and handling lines on the bridge during night attacks. The submarine bore scars, dented fittings, strained machinery, wiring patched again and again under red lights. Yet morale held because the mission mattered. Every ship sunk meant fewer supplies reaching island garrisons already collapsing under American pressure. Night after night, Tang hunted with the same ruthless discipline. Radar contacts appeared, were plotted, then erased. Freighters vanished in pillars of flame. Small escorts were avoided or confused, forced to chase shadows while the submarine slipped past. O'Kane's doctrine of aggression proved itself beyond doubt. Close range meant certainty. Speed meant survival. Precision meant dominance. The ocean responded with resistance. Enemy patrols increased. Aircraft prowled shipping lanes by day. Sonar searches grew sharper, more persistent. Yet Tang continued to operate inside contested waters, striking where escorts were thickest and depth was least forgiving. It was an act of defiance as much as strategy. Each engagement pushed the patrol deeper into uncharted territory, for the submarine and for the men inside her. In the control room, charts filled with grease marks and crossed-out tracks. The navigation team worked constantly, recalculating position after every evasive maneuver. Fire control teams reset solutions with mechanical calm, even as cumulative fatigue slowed reaction times. O'Kane watched it all closely, aware that records were meaningless if the boat did not return. As the patrol neared its end, the significance became undeniable. Tang had not merely succeeded, she had altered the standard by which submarine warfare would be measured. Her tactics would be studied. Her results would be cited in training rooms and after-action reports. She had demonstrated what a single submarine, properly commanded, could do to an enemy's lifeline. But records came with a cost. The enemy was no longer careless. The sea ahead bristled with escorts and patrols alert to every shadow and sound. Tang carried history on her hull now, and history attracts attention. Somewhere beyond the next horizon waited the engagement that would decide whether this record-breaking patrol would end in triumph or in silence. The night of October 24, 1944, arrived heavy and lightless, the kind of darkness that erased horizons and turned the sea into a single black mass. USS Tang surfaced once more near the Pescadores Islands, running fast and silent beneath a sky smothered by cloud. The patrol had already rewritten records, but the war did not pause for tallies. Radar painted fresh contacts ahead, enemy transports moving with urgency, escorted and alert, carrying men and material racing toward threatened fronts. O'Kane went to the bridge, wind tearing at his cap as lookouts hunched low. The sea was calm, deceptively so. Bearings tightened. Ranges collapsed. The convoy's outline resolved into shapes and motion, screws churning steadily, escorts weaving tight patterns. This was not a careless target. This was a defended run, and the enemy knew submarines were near. Tang pressed in anyway. Engines drove her across the convoy's bow, threading darkness with speed and intent. Below, fire control recalculated with relentless focus, grease pencils flashing over charts. Torpedo crews stood ready, muscles coiled, breath measured. There was no hesitation in O'Kane's orders. Close the range. Take the shot. The first torpedoes ran hot and true. Explosions cracked the night open, flame leaping skyward as a transport staggered and slowed. A second ship took a hit and began to settle, its deck awash with fire and confusion. Tracers arced wildly as escorts reacted, searchlights snapping on too late, cutting empty water where Tang had been seconds before. The sea filled with noises, gunfire, alarms, shouted commands layered over the deep thunder of breaking steel. O'Kane maneuvered inside the chaos, angling for finishing shots. He knew the escorts would close fast. He knew aircraft could arrive with dawn. Still, the doctrine held. Precision first. Withdrawal later. Another torpedo left the tube. Another target burned. The convoy's formation dissolved under pressure, ships scattering as escorts chased ghosts. Then the night tightened. Sonar pings cut through the water with a sharper edge. Depth charges splashed close, detonations punching hard enough to rattle teeth and fittings. O'Kane ordered a hard turn and a dive, slipping Tang beneath the surface as explosions rolled overhead. The boat shuddered, then steadied, descending into black water streaked with bubbles and debris. Inside, reports came quick and clipped. Systems strained but functioning. Batteries holding. No critical flooding. The enemy had found them, but not yet fixed them. O'Kane listened, calculating the escort's pattern, weighing risk against opportunity. Above, propellers churned in tightening circles. The hunt was on again. Minutes passed like hours. The sea pressed in, sound magnified by steel and water. Tang had struck hard one last time, but escape would demand perfection. O'Kane watched the gauges, waited for the smallest opening, and prepared to move, knowing that the next decision would either carry his boat clear, or bring the patrol to its reckoning. Just after midnight on October 25, 1944, USS Tang rose once more to periscope depth. The sea above was alive with wreckage, oil slicks, and scattered escorts still searching blindly through smoke and darkness. One enemy transport remained afloat, damaged but moving. O'Kane chose to finish it. The decision was routine. The moment was not. Inside the forward torpedo room, the last Mark 18 electric torpedo was readied. It was quiet, wakeless, and trusted. The firing solution was short-range and precise. Bearings steady. Speed confirmed. The order was given without drama. The torpedo left the tube cleanly and disappeared into the black water ahead. Seconds passed. Then something was wrong. The sound returned, faint at first, then unmistakable. A high-speed whine cutting through the water, growing louder instead of fading. Sonar operators froze. The bearings shifted rapidly. The torpedo was circling. Hard left rudder. Full power. The commands came fast, but physics was faster. The Mark 18 had malfunctioned, running in a deadly loop, homing not on the enemy but on the submarine that fired it. In the confined waters off the Pescadores, there was no room to outrun it. No depth to dive beneath it. No time. The explosion struck aft with catastrophic force. Steel tore open. The pressure hull buckled. Lights went out instantly. Men were thrown violently to the deck as compartments filled with water in seconds. The stern vanished in fire and shock, and USS Tang began a steep, uncontrolled descent. The boat was dying. O'Kane was knocked unconscious, then came to amid chaos, darkness, screams, rushing water. He ordered an emergency blow, but compressed air could not overcome the damage. The submarine plunged toward the bottom, breaking apart as she fell. In moments, Tang struck the seabed and settled, shattered, in nearly 200 feet of water. Only a handful of men survived the initial blast. Trapped in flooded compartments, they faced an impossible choice. One by one, they escaped through the forward torpedo room using mumps and lungs, ascending through darkness and pressure toward a surface that might already be crawling with enemy patrols. Many never made it. Some drowned. Others lost consciousness and slipped back into the depths. O'Kane reached the surface barely alive, his lungs burning, his body exhausted. Around him, debris and oil marked where USS Tang had ended her war. Enemy ships circled, guns trained, lights sweeping. There was no escape left. Survivors were pulled from the water and taken prisoner. By dawn, the sea was calm again. No trace of the submarine remained visible. USS Tang, the most successful American submarine of World War II, lay broken on the ocean floor, lost not to enemy weapons, but to a single failed torpedo fired in the final moments of an extraordinary patrol. And with that loss, the Pacific claimed its price. When dawn broke over the Pacific on October 25, 1944, the war moved on without USS Tang. Enemy patrols steamed past the oil-slicked water where she had vanished, unaware of the scale of what had just ended beneath the surface. But the loss of the submarine did not erase her impact. In truth, it sealed it. Commander Richard O'Kane and the surviving crew were taken into captivity, interrogated, and dispersed among prison camps. Even there, the numbers followed them. 33 enemy ships destroyed. Over 116,000 tons sunk. A single patrol that surpassed every submarine record the U.S. Navy had ever known. The enemy could silence a submarine, but they could not undo the damage already carved into their supply lines. Back in the United States, intelligence officers reconstructed the patrol from logs, survivor accounts, and intercepted enemy traffic. What emerged was not just a list of sinkings, but a blueprint. O'Kane's doctrine: close-range attacks, night surface assaults, aggressive maneuvering inside escort screens, was no longer considered reckless. It was studied, formalized, taught. Submarine warfare shifted away from cautious distance and toward controlled audacity. Weapons development followed. The Mark 18's failure aboard Tang accelerated reforms in torpedo testing and reliability. Procedures changed. Safety protocols hardened. The Navy acknowledged that technical flaws, not enemy skill, had ended one of its greatest boats and vowed not to repeat the mistake. From tragedy came precision. The men of Tang were honored in absence. Citations were written. Patrol reports circulated through submarine squadrons across the Pacific. Younger officers memorized the lessons of O'Kane's command: how patience defeated sonar, how speed shattered convoys, how discipline under pressure kept a boat alive longer than luck ever could. The submarine force carried those lessons forward into the final months of the war, tightening the noose around an enemy already bleeding. Years later, when the war had faded into history, USS Tang remained a benchmark. Her name surfaced in classrooms, wardrooms, and quiet conversations between submariners who understood what it meant to fight blind beneath the sea. She proved that a single boat, commanded with clarity and nerve, could change the balance of an ocean. Steel rusts. Hulls collapse. The ocean erases wreckage without mercy. But doctrine endures. So does example. On the seafloor near the Pescadores, Tang rests in silence, her pressure hull broken but her legacy intact. She did not return home, yet her influence traveled farther than any submarine patrol before her. Every aggressive maneuver, every close-range firing solution that followed in the Pacific carried a trace of her design. The war would end less than a year later. Submarines would surface into victory. And though USS Tang would never join them, the Navy she reshaped would. Her final contribution was not measured in tonnage or records, but in how the silent service learned to fight and win beneath a blackened sea.